Today, a show of unity. European leaders rally behind Ukraine, but insist any peace plan with Russia needs support from the US. Also ahead, Israel stops all aid from entering Gaza after Hamas rejects its proposal to extend the ceasefire. Residents in parts of Queensland and New South Wales brace for tropical cyclone Alfred to make landfall later in the week. House prices rebound after the Reserve Bank cut interest rates, ending a 3-month downturn. And film fans and fashionistas count down to Hollywood's biggest night, the 97th Annual Academy Awards. Hello, I'm Gemma Veness and this is ABC News Mornings, coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people. Britain, France and Ukraine have agreed to work on a ceasefire plan to present to the United States after a stunning showdown in the White House that threatens future relations and support to the nation at war with Russia.
I think that our relationship will continue. We need to be open. Everyone can see how Ukraine is fighting for its independence and freedom, and we are grateful to the people of the United States and all the countries that support us. A failure of Ukraine would not just mean Putin's success, it would mean a failure for Europe. It would mean a failure for the United States.
The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking in London after a show of unity from world leaders as they gathered to discuss the conflict and how to rally behind Kyiv. The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, told the summit Europe is at a crossroads in history and it must take responsibility for defending itself. But he says any plan for peace in Ukraine needs to have the support of the United States.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing.
Volodymyr Zelensky met with King Charles at his Sandringham estate after securing more military commitments from Kyiv's European allies in London. Now, his visit follows the extraordinary breakdown in talks between the Ukrainian and US leaders in Washington.
You're playing drugs. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once?
That fiery exchange continues to send shockwaves around the world. The United States has been Ukraine's largest single donor, and Mr. Zelensky was at the White House to discuss a deal for the US to invest in Ukraine's critical minerals to ensure future support. The Trump administration says it's ready to re-engage when Ukraine is ready to make peace.
The sooner everyone grows up around here and figures out that this is a bad war that's heading in a bad direction with death and destruction and all kinds of dangers surrounding it that could spiral into a broader conflict, the sooner people grow up and realize that, I think the more progress we're going to be able to make.
The Oval Office blowout has sparked protests in the US and in Europe as people rally behind Ukraine. Many people demonstrating say they're disappointed in Washington's diplomatic shift and its willingness to embrace Russia after it invaded Ukraine.
I would like to say I would not be surprised by anything Trump did, but I was astonished that two such bullies, could turn on a hero like that. Somebody they supported fully in the past and Trump has praised in the past. It was absolutely disgusting.
Now is the time to act, and I really hope that they put a plan in place, plan that is actually fair, because what other parties are offering is not very fair. So we fought for 3 years and we want peace more than anyone else.
The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will soon present a plan to increase defence spending to re-arm Europe, saying the bloc must prepare for the worst. And the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has underscored the need for allies to ensure Kyiv has a strong military so it can defend itself once the war ends. While the Kremlin continues to reject any attempts to put European peacekeepers in Ukraine.
This plan of peacekeepers in Ukraine is a continuation of the incitement of the Kyiv regime to wage a war against us.
Let's get more on this. We're joined by Associate Professor Ben Wellings from Monash University. Dr. Wellings, thank you for your time. Now, as to this meeting in London, what was the ultimate goal of this, and how did that public spat between Trump, JD Vance and Zelensky change the approach of the meeting?
Yeah, well, the meeting was already scheduled, Gemma, so there was a big shift after that showdown in the Oval Office on Friday, and really it was to try and shore up support for Ukraine, but from the European side plus Canada, given that the Trump administration and the MAGA movement seem to be moving closer to Russia and further away from the Europeans and certainly the Ukrainians. So there's some sort of sense that, like, you know, should, with great sympathy, should Zelensky be moved in a direction that rescues that deal over critical minerals, even though that strips away a lot of autonomy and resources from Ukraine and is hardly a great deal from Ukraine's point of view. But it's really the focus shifted after Friday onto shoring up and what remains of the Western alliance, because there's a big question over whether that really exists anymore, and coming up with a European plan in which Europe shoulders the security burdens and all the costs and risks that go with that. So it was high stakes, and the actors there are fully aware of the historic circumstances around this.
We'll go to the substance of the meeting in just a moment, but I just want to address the optics there. We've seen a bit of this on our screens, but Zelensky warmly welcomed by European leaders. He met with King Charles as well. So very different scenes. Why is that important?
Well, this is about the symbolic messaging, and the meeting with King Charles, of course, is important because when Keir Starmer was in Washington the day before Zelensky arrived, and that now famous meeting, he was able to play into the kind of flattery that President Trump appears to encourage and enjoy, and offer second state visits to the United Kingdom in a meeting with the King. And then so to offer that to Zelensky sort of says, well, you know, Britain's trying to act as a bridge between the US, Europe and Ukraine. Whether that will be successful or whether Starmer, who seemed to have quite a positive diplomatic outcome from his visit, and likewise Macron the day before Starmer's, so there's a lot of shuttle diplomacy across the Atlantic at the moment, then it's really about trying to sort of say, well, you know, the Europeans have got to do this themselves, but they still need the US backing Europe, backing the Western alliance, not sliding into Russia's camp in order to bring about the end of this war in a way that doesn't look like a capitulation to Russia's aggression.
Now, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a new $2 billion deal to allow Ukraine to purchase 5,000 air defence missiles using export finance. How significant was this announcement there?
Well, these are very visible attempts to say, well, if the money's not coming from the US anymore, and the US government seeks to kind of extract back the money that it gave initially under the Biden administration, which seems to be the Trump-Vance approach, then Ukraine needs support in money and materiel coming from somewhere else. And so this was a first way of saying, you know, Britain can contribute to this, and hopefully other European powers will contribute what they can. If the political will to do that is there. Of course, levels of defence spending have fallen to historic lows since the end of the Cold War across NATO's Europe members. So it kind of raises questions, well, you know, what is this coming at the expense of? And in the United Kingdom, it's coming at the expense of international aid, which kind of mirrors the Trump administration's withdrawal from funding US aid agencies. So it's not a cost-free thing, of course, and of course the risks are high. If the talk about British boots on the ground and planes in the air is followed through, then of course that puts a NATO member or one of the significant nuclear-armed NATO members, very close to the scene of the fighting, which could have flow-on consequences.
Associate Professor Ben Wellings from Monash University, thank you for speaking with us.
Thanks, Gemma.
Israel's Prime Minister argues Hamas needs to learn there are consequences to its actions after he announced all aid deliveries to Gaza would be stopped. This comes after Hamas rejected a US proposal to extend the temporary ceasefire in the war-ravaged Strip. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran is in Jerusalem.
Just hours after the initial 6-week ceasefire in Gaza expired, a major fracture appeared in the relative truce there. Benjamin Netanyahu announcing all aid deliveries, not just the increase in humanitarian supplies promised during the ceasefire, but all convoys would be stopped effective immediately. Some trucks carrying pallets of supplies were stuck at the Egyptian crossing into Gaza, not getting any notice of the decision. The reason for it was that Israel had adopted a US proposal to extend the temporary ceasefire into mid-April in a bid to secure the release of more Israeli hostages. Hamas had rejected that idea, saying it was a stalling technique designed to avoid negotiations on a lasting peace in the Strip. Israel says that if Hamas changes its position now, those talks on a so-called Phase 2 deal can begin. But until then, the position is clear.
And I want to make one thing clear. There will be no free lunches. If Hamas thinks that it will be possible to continue the ceasefire or to enjoy the conditions of Phase 1 without us accepting hostages, it is very mistaken.
Hamas says the announcement amounts to a war crime. It is saying that it is cheap blackmail on the lives of Palestinians and is calling on the international community to not only pressure Israel to allow aid in, but also to pressure the Netanyahu government to come to the negotiating table and hold those Phase 2 talks. Humanitarian agencies too sounding the alarm, the International Red Cross saying it could unravel the momentum towards peace and the meagre improvement in living standards in Gaza. The plan Israel is sticking to, it says, was developed by Steve Witkoff, the US President Donald Trump's special envoy to the Middle East. Under the proposal, the temporary ceasefire would be extended through the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and beyond the Jewish festival of Passover. That takes it into mid-April. Under such a proposal, Hamas would free half of the 59 Israeli hostages still held in Gaza on day one, and more than 30 of those are believed to have been killed in captivity. The rest of the hostages would be freed once a permanent ceasefire was agreed to. The reason Hamas doesn't want to necessarily agree to such a proposal is because it would limit its bargaining power going forward. Having fewer hostages in its custody means that it would want some ironclad guarantees from Israel about the future of Gaza, things like the Israeli military withdrawal before it went ahead with any such plan. And those are far trickier issues to come to an agreement on than the initial ceasefire talks back in January.
Residents in southeast Queensland are on high alert with tropical cyclone Alfred forecast to make landfall sometime from Thursday. Let's get more on this. Our reporter Ariana Levy joins us now. And Ari, there's still lots of uncertainty around this system, but what are the main concerns here?
Yeah, good morning, Gemma. Well, the Bureau is hoping for a clearer picture of the cyclone's track path a little bit later today into tomorrow. But what we do know so far about tropical cyclone Alfred is that it remains about 400 kilometres off the coast west of Queensland, a little bit west of Bundaberg, and is moving southeast, so away from Australia. But that's all expected to change from tomorrow when it's predicted to sort of turn west and head straight back for the Queensland coast. Now, there are early indications that it could make landfall from Thursday evening as a Category 2, but the Bureau is still uncertain as to where exactly the system will cross the coast. And so there has been modelling that has also shown that effectively the system is predicted to expand before it makes that coastal crossing, which means it effectively encapsulates a larger portion of the Queensland coastline. So we're talking about areas of impact from Bundaberg all the way down to the Gold Coast and even into northern New South Wales. Now, authorities are particularly concerned not just about the gale force winds, the coastal erosion and also hazardous surf conditions, but it's that intense to heavy rainfall that could be experienced, particularly south of wherever the eye of the storm is. That could bring some pretty significant rainfall totals, anywhere from 300 to 600 millimetres within a short period of time. And that is quite a significant amount of rain for southeast Queensland in particular. So there are flood watches that are current from Hervey Bay all the way down to Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. And we've already heard from the Premier, David Crisafulli, who says and has urged residents to use this time and opportunity to prepare nice and early.
We've already begun a dialogue with the telecommunications to make sure that if there is the need to disseminate a large amount of messaging to a large population, that there's that extra bandwidth. But that can't be the only way that people get their advice. They've also got to go onto the disaster website, go and have a look at what the bomb's saying, talk to your neighbour.
Ari, authorities are currently searching for a Lithuanian rower who was off the Queensland coast. Can you tell us about that search?
Yeah, Gemma, this is quite an extraordinary story. So a search and rescue operation is currently underway for, as you mentioned, the Lithuanian sea ocean long distance rower Aramis Mokus, who had been attempting to row from San Diego in the United States all the way to Brisbane. And he started this solo quest back in August last year, but that all came to a halt last Friday when Mr. Mokus sent out an emergency alert to authorities asking them for assistance when he'd become sort of entangled in Tropical Cyclone Alfred. He was about 90 kilometres west of the system and said he was incredibly fatigued. Now, Australian Navy ship had deployed from Brisbane on Saturday to provide him with assistance. That's expected to arrive at his location sometime this morning to help him out. But again, given the unusual nature of this tropical cyclone and the fact that it's lingered off the coast for such a long, prolonged period of time, authorities are really pushing that message to residents and locals to make sure they keep as updated on information across this system as possible.
Reporter Ariana Levy in Brisbane, thank you. House prices are on the rise again after a 3-month decline. Reporter Stephanie Ferrier joins us now from Melbourne. Steph, what are these figures showing us?
Good morning. Yes, this is CoreLogic's Home Value Index, and CoreLogic says it's that improved sentiment among buyers, coupled with the expectation of that interest rate cut that did actually eventuate last month, which really buoyed confidence and reversed that trend downwards, which was a very shallow downturn, it must be said, just 0.4% over the prior 3 months. But nationally, we have seen house prices rebounding, up 0.3%. And here in Melbourne, as well as Hobart, well, we've led the charge. These are capital cities, of course, that have seen pretty weak price growth in the past. In fact, here in Melbourne, this actually reverses 10 consecutive months of falls. We've also seen a reverse in declines as well in Sydney and Canberra, while Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth have also continued to rise, albeit a little bit more modestly than what we have seen in previous months. And it's only Darwin that has actually fallen. Now, that actually takes the median house price in the nation to just under $816,000. And I'm here in Cheltenham, which is a suburb in Melbourne southeast. We're about 18 kilometres southeast of the CBD. This is an area which is earmarked for high growth, and it's also an area where I've been speaking to a lot of people down here, and housing affordability is a big issue here. They say that it is going to be a major topic at the upcoming federal election. I spoke to some of them about this yet again increase in house prices, and one of the people I spoke to was Samud. Her name means resilience in Arabic, and she says, look, you've got to have a lot of resilience to get onto the property market. This is what she and some others had to say.
We need to build more, we need to plan more. We can't build in the same areas where the traffic is already congested. We need to do this right. We need to think about master planning, transport planning, how people move. putting a full-on community school, so it's not just let's build.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, rent's just one expense in life. There's definitely a ton of others. Trying to pay off the HEX loans as well is one other factor that we need to try and think of. And then, yeah, there's just every other daily life expenses as well that keep going up, which doesn't help.
And so that's just a few of the comments from people that I've been speaking to down here in Cheltenham. But as they say, it is a very big issue that is very front and centre in their minds. And CoreLogic says that part of this increase in the house prices could also be, as they've mentioned, a matter of supply. So they are saying that the listings for new home sales have actually fallen, and they're down by almost 5% at the same time as last year.
Steph Ferrier in Melbourne, thank you. Illicit tobacco is readily available in cash-only stores right across the country. Tonight's Four Corners reveals the vast supply network, stretching from Melbourne suburbs to international smuggling routes. Here's a sneak peek at the investigation that uses concealed cameras in conjunction with exclusive access to law enforcement.
In affluent Australian suburbs, these same cigarettes are sold openly on the black market. Border Force has seized thousands of cartons of them. They're stored at a covert location.
We have a container that's over there at the moment.
The night before we filmed, Border Force hit the jackpot, intercepting a container full of illicit tobacco. What are they saying was in this?
In this one was apparel, in terms of clothing apparel coming through. Right. But when you actually look behind, and this is what our X-ray image will give us an indication for, and if I remove this piece of concealment coming through, if you look here down, we've got Manchester brand cigarettes in this consignment, and as I said, estimating around 10 million cigarettes that are potentially within this container all the way through.
So it's essentially potentially a $10 million
Could potentially be.
Load. As we walk past pallets stacked high with cigarettes, confiscated by Border Force in just 1 week.
As mentioned earlier, last week alone we seized around 59 million cigarette sticks.
Tony tells me there's one brand they're seeing over and over.
And you can see with these products here, Manchester brand tobacco being imported within the cartons.
But the cigarettes Border Force doesn't intercept flow through the hands of organised crime onto Australia's streets. Yeah, we see these shops mushrooming everywhere. Is there a concern that the horse is bolted on this?
We'll do everything we can at the border and we do everything we can offshore, but equally we need to be working domestically. Well, certainly we're on the right.
Tony Smith says while Australians continue to smoke black market cigarettes, the federal government will keep losing tax revenue.
This year, financial year alone, around $2.3 billion in lost excise and revenue that could have been received at the border. It's a significant amount of money that could have been funnelled into other forms of government support, whether that's through roads, but importantly health, education and all of those other things that we rely on day to day as a community. The worst part about that is it's not just being wasted, it's being used for other forms of criminality. Could be converted into border control drugs, weapons, firearms or anything else that is no longer a victimless crime.
And Four Corners investigative reporter Dan Oakes joins us now from Melbourne. Dan, can you tell us about this industry in Australia? It is booming. What is fueling this? And our apologies there to our viewers. We're just having some communication issues there, as you can see at the moment. So we will endeavour to get those communications up. But in the meantime, we'll just move on to another story and hope to get those communications. Now, the parents of 2 Melbourne women who died from methanol poisoning in Laos have called for travellers to boycott the country until it investigates the deaths properly. Holly Bowles and Bianca Jones were among 6 people who died after drinking tainted alcohol in Vang Vieng in November. Their parents have described the investigation into the tragedy as disgraceful and horrendous.
Holly Bowles and Bianca Jones had the world at their feet and a lifetime of memories ahead of them.
It's moments that you have in your head, you know, things like Holly getting married and walking down the aisle with Sean. Like, it's these things that you know are now never going to happen.
The best friends were among 6 people who died as a result of methanol poisoning in the Laos tourist town of Vang Vieng. 3 months on, no charges have been laid and the families are still looking for answers.
Our girls were murdered and nothing's getting done. And that's really hard.
How did you feel when you found out that they had rejected that offer of support from the AFP?
What are they hiding?
One of the bars where the girls were drinking has now reopened, but the factory where it's believed the tainted alcohol was distilled remains closed. So too is the hostel at the centre of the poisoning scandal. 11 staff members from Nana Backpackers who were initially detained have now been released from custody, but the ABC understands they're still under house arrest.
It's incredibly concerning. It seems to reek of a cover-up.
With everything that we've seen, very hard to have any confidence that the right person will be held accountable.
Yeah.
Are you worried someone might be a scapegoat?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
The government in Laos did not respond to the ABC's request for an update into the investigation. Police told us they're cooperating with relevant authorities, and a spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs resent their only public statement on the incident issued last November.
With so much uncertainty, the families have this message for anyone thinking of travelling to the Southeast Asian nation.
Don't go.
Don't go to Laos.
No.
Just do not go. It's just not safe for travellers. It just isn't. We've seen that firsthand.
If you want people to come to your country, make it safe. Make it a safe place.
It's a message echoed by parents of other victims as well.
I'd say absolutely don't go. Don't go.
Do not go, simply. It's way too dangerous.
A spokesman for the Department of Foreign Affairs said the Australian government is continuing to call for a transparent and thorough investigation, something the families say is yet to be delivered. Lauren Day, ABC News.
OK, let's return now to tonight's Four Corners, which has revealed a vast supply network of illicit tobacco stretching from Melbourne suburbs to international smuggling routes. Investigative reporter Dan Oakes joins us from Melbourne. Dan, good to have you. Can you tell us about this industry in Australia? We know it's booming. What is fueling this?
Well, look, there's various theories floating around, but one thing seems to be beyond doubt, which is that the government policy of sort of the last 15 years of steep excise or tobacco tax rises has helped fuel this black market because, when you essentially try and prohibit something by stealth, which is what's happened, you create the conditions for a black market. And when you add in cost of living pressures, which we're all aware of, and also a very lax kind of law enforcement and regulatory approach to illicit tobacco up until this point in time, when you combine all those things, it's essentially created a perfect storm.
What did you uncover about the network behind this?
Well, it's, the extraordinary thing, and people watching this will probably be saying to themselves, yes, I've seen this, is just the proliferation of shops just popping up like mushrooms, every high street, every suburb, every town. And, there are a number of criminal syndicates in every state that are sort of vying for this market. In Victoria, we've seen that's kind of exploded into, violence, arson, fire bombings, extortion. In other states, haven't seen that kind of overt, really visible manifestation of what's happening here. So attention's, sort of been focused a lot on Victoria, but this is a problem that is, it's from Hobart to far north Queensland, Perth to Sydney. It's across the country. And are there fears that violence could spread or escalate? Yeah, look, it's, only a few weeks ago here in Melbourne, Katie Tangi, who's a woman who was house sitting for her brother, the house was firebombed in what police have said was a case of mistaken identity. And so she's died and she's, has no connection to the illicit tobacco industry whatsoever. Police have been really concerned that these firebombings are going to start taking innocent lives because there's been a few sort of close escapes up until Katie Tangi's death, families living behind a shop that's been torched, shops on the ground floor of apartment buildings. So, police were really worried that, eventually an innocent life was going to be lost, and that's what's happened. And Dan, did the investigation reveal any signs of corruption within law enforcement or political circles? Look, no, but police and authorities have said for a long time that tobacco smuggling syndicates rely on what they call trusted insiders, who are people who have been compromised, sometimes within logistics companies, sometimes customs brokers, and sometimes people within law enforcement. We didn't find that specifically in this case, but there have been several examples historically of customs or border force officials being corrupted in order to facilitate the illicit tobacco smuggling.
Four Corners investigative reporter Dan Oakes joining us there from Melbourne. Thank you.
Thanks. And
you can see Dan's full story on Four Corners tonight at 8:30 on ABC TV and on iView. It's time to check in on the weather now with Nate Byrne. Morning, Nate. Now, what is the latest on Tropical Cyclone Alfred for southeastern Queensland and also northeastern New South Wales?
Yeah, morning, Gemma. It is looking pretty dicey for that part of the world later on this week. For now, we're already starting to feel the effects of this system. It was upgraded to a Category 2 tropical cyclone, so I had dipped last night to a Cat 1, now this morning back up to Cat 2. It's continuing to move southeastwards through the day today, but tomorrow we're likely to see it take a right-hand turn and start heading westwards. Now, it's far enough offshore that we're not getting much out of it in terms of heavy rainfall. Certainly a little bit of shower activity just licking the coast, but it's the surf that's a problem. So warnings are on for damaging surf, abnormally high tides as well. We've got hazardous surf extending from 1770 in Queensland down well into New South Wales along the north coast there, and that's because this system is sitting relatively slow moving and it's pumping winds around it. So essentially southeasterly winds are racing up the east coast, and that's what's helping to really pick up those swells. Although it is far enough offshore that most of the wild weather, at least, is something we won't have to deal with just yet. Although I am keeping an eye on some storm action through Western Australia. We've got a lot of heat in the country as well right now, and in fact some extreme fire danger to watch for the south of WA today. And plenty of high fire danger across the country. In terms of stormy weather, though, not much going on in the east. There's a little bit in parts of New South Wales. Northwestern parts of the country, we could see some severe thunderstorm action a little bit later on in the day, but mostly it's a pretty settled day across the country, Gemma. It's one of those ones, while it's this far off, it's good to keep an eye on because things could change pretty quickly.
Yeah, indeed. Now, sticking with Alfred for a moment, what is the latest on when we'd expect it to cross the coast?
It's still a ways out, but we're looking Thursday, perhaps late or into Friday, potential for a coastal crossing. Now, the Bureau is saying that when it comes in, we could be seeing rainfall rates pushing as big as 600 millimetres in a day. That's flooding territory. So flood watches are already current for southeastern Queensland and northeastern New South Wales. Here's how it's going to move. Well, not how it is going to move. This is how this model says it's going to move. Still a bit of disagreement and uncertainty about exactly where it's going to cross the coast, but we should see it turning pretty rapidly into westward flow, getting into Queensland, northeastern New South Wales. The south side of the system is where it's going to be the wettest, certainly hundreds of millimetres on the way. On the other thing we're keeping an eye on, of course, is heat. That's still continuing to bother the country. Severe to extreme heat wave conditions across the north. We see that's flushing out of Queensland as some new air comes in, courtesy of Alfred.
And can you take us around the states?
All right, let's whip around. This is actually going to be pretty easy today. Some storms for the Gulf country in Queensland right up the top as well, and then showers for the southeastern coast. Brisbane's getting to 31 degrees. Of course, watch those hazardous surf conditions getting into New South Wales. We've got showers through the east, the odd storm today for the Hunter, also in the far northeast and for the northwest slopes. Sydney's got some showers, 26. Canberra, dry, 28. And then it's pretty dry across Victoria. A couple of drops in the far east, that's it. 22 for Melbourne today. And in Tassie, a couple of drops for the central north and the northeast. That's it. Hobart, you're getting to 21. South Australia, no rainfall on at all. 30 on the way for Adelaide. Meanwhile, in WA, we've got those storms through the interior. Some showers developing around the southwest Capes this evening too. A dry 28 for Perth though. And then up north, more storms for the west and a chance north of Elliot in the Territory, Gemma, but there's not a heck of a lot in it today. Even Darwin's staying dry, getting to 34.
Thanks, Nate. This is ABC News. Our top stories. The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has hosted the Ukrainian president at a meeting of European leaders to discuss ongoing support for Ukraine in the war with Russia. The summit in London follows President Volodymyr Zelensky's fiery meeting with US President Donald Trump at the White House. Mr. Zelensky says he believes he can salvage his relationship with the US president and remains ready to sign the proposed minerals deal. Israel has stopped all aid from entering Gaza in response to Hamas rejecting an extension to the temporary ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office warned of additional consequences if Hamas did not accept the terms of the extension. The militant group has labelled the decision cheap blackmail. Emergency preparations are underway for tropical cyclone Alfred, which could threaten southeast Queensland and parts of New South Wales in the coming days. The system is expected to make landfall between Bundaberg and the Gold Coast as a Category 2 storm on Thursday. Gale force winds and intense rain of up to 600 millimetres is forecast from Wednesday. House prices jumped in February, potentially signalling an end to one of the shortest and mildest property downturns on record. In unwelcome news for first home buyers, CoreLogic's Home Value Index registered a 0.3% rise nationally. In the same month, the Reserve Bank cut interest rates. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced a new deal to allow Ukraine to purchase thousands of air defence missiles following a summit of European leaders in London. Europe Bureau Chief Zoe Ford has more from London.
The British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer emerged from the security summit in London of European leaders to say that we were at a crossroads and it was time to act. He said the UK, France and others would work together with Ukraine to come up with a plan to stop the fighting and that they'd take that plan to the United States and move forward together. Keir Starmer said that there were 4 points to the plan: to keep military aid flowing and keep the economic pressure on Russia, to agree that a lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table for any discussions. He said that in the event of a peace deal, it was important to boost Ukraine's capabilities to defer future invasions and develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and guarantee peace for the future. Sir Keir Starmer then announced £1.6 billion, around $3.2 billion, to buy 5,000 air defence missiles for Ukraine. He said the UK would put boots on the ground and planes in the air. However, he said that the European leaders had discussed that while Europe can do the heavy lifting, they still need backing from the United States. So that relationship was still very, very important. During the press conference, Sir Keir Starmer was asked whether the European leaders at this summit, some 19 of them, discussed going it alone without the United States and whether the United States was still a reliable ally. This is what Sir Keir Starmer had to say about that.
But I do not accept that the US is an unreliable ally. The US has been a reliable ally to the UK for many, many decades and continues to be. There are no two countries as closely aligned as our two countries, and our defence, our security and intelligence is intertwined in a way no two other countries are. So it's an important and reliable ally for us.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was warmly welcomed at the summit by all of the leaders. Afterwards, he met with King Charles III, a meeting that was organised at the request of the UK government. Europe's leaders will next come together on Thursday in Brussels. All 27 nations will come together, including some of those who were not invited to this summit, some of the smaller nations, and some of those who are more sympathetic towards Moscow. But all of those nations will come together on Thursday in Brussels, not only to discuss Ukraine, but to discuss the security of the continent more broadly.
US President Donald Trump's extraordinary rebuke of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House is reverberating through global politics. And it's prompting nations allied with the United States to reassess their security arrangements. Radio National Breakfast political correspondent Melissa Clark joins us now. And Mel, European leaders, they're now having to consider what their security arrangements would look like without US support. What about Australia?
Well, Australia is looking at its own architecture as well and what a capricious leader in the White House might mean for Australia's security agreement. We know European leaders are now concerned about how much value there is in the NATO alliance. Although Ukraine isn't a NATO member country, the fact that the view from the White House has changed so much upon the arrival of Donald Trump back to its Oval Office means that they're reassessing how they can work on their own. Now, for Australia, we do have 4 formal alliances with the US, both the ANZUS Treaty and AUKUS, but ANZUS Treaty doesn't have as explicit a security guarantee as, say, the NATO arrangement does. So it's questionable if Europe is worried about how much value there is in that alliance now, then you would have to argue there's even less with ANZUS, given there's only an implicit security guarantee in that. AUKUS is something that will develop over the decades to come, but at the moment is more about the future than where we are now. Australia, if we look at our links and security ties with the US, is really developed around intelligence and joint defence facilities. So the Five Eyes intelligence sharing arrangements, which the Australian government and the opposition both say are not affected in any way by this changing position on Russia from Donald Trump. And when we have our joint defence facilities, these are things like Pine Gap and Northwest Cape. They're really integral not just to our defence, but to the United States' defence of itself. So that's really critical in this relationship, because it comes to not just how the US might help with security around the world, it's important for the US's own security at home. So however isolationist the US might become, facilities in Australia are still really important to that. So that's a real asset to Australia in looking at how its security relationship with the US is going to evolve as Donald Trump keeps making changes from the White House.
Yeah, Mel, it is often commented that what Donald Trump does is more important than what he says. Is that the case here?
Look, what he says is ever so important in this case, because when it comes to security and defence arrangements, what you say about your intentions and your willingness to act are actually a really crucial part of security architecture. So we can have all of the security arrangements, we have treaties, military hardware, all of these things to try to deter any aggression towards us or to try and ensure that peace remains. But if our adversaries are not convinced that we're willing to use them, or they're not convinced that the US would invoke our treaties and come to our defence, then they're worth much less. They don't have that deterrent value if they're not convinced that they're going to be used. So it's one thing to say, well, just look at what Donald Trump does, but what he says matters too, because of the signal it sends. Now, for Australia and the US, there is still an alignment about views of what the risks are in our part of the world, in the Indo-Pacific, the joint concern about China's actions in much of our region. That will hold Australia in good stead in terms of its relationship with the US. But this approach of undermining the certainty of alliances, particularly really strong historic ones like we've seen across the Atlantic, are ones of concern. And look, on Radio National Breakfast this morning, we spoke to Alastair Campbell, who is a former advisor to UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, but is perhaps more better known to people today as the co-host of the Rest of Politics podcast. And he talked about this too, explaining that in this time, words matter.
I think we have to recognise that we can no longer say that this is just a sort of buffoon in the White House saying crazy things. He may be saying crazy things, but they have real strategic consequences for all of us.
It certainly does affect all of us, so that's why we will keep watching very closely what Donald Trump both says and does.
Radio National's breakfast political correspondent Melissa Clark, thank you. Creditors of the former owner of Whyalla Steelworks will meet today after the South Australian government forced the business into administration. Reporter Rachel Merritt joins us now from Adelaide. Rachel, how much money is it believed that creditors will be chasing?
Good morning, Gemma. More than $1 billion is the sum which the ABC understands. So creditors of the Whyalla Steelworks are being owed. The first contractors meeting will be held today in Whyalla with the South Australian Premier, Peter Malinauskas, Treasurer and other senior government officials to be in attendance. This will be a chance for the newly appointed administrators, Korda-Mentha, to shed some light on what they've learnt about the depths of debt in Whyalla, and for creditors too, a chance to ask some questions about whether they'll get their money back, and if so, when. The state government made the move to put the works in put the works into administration just under 2 weeks ago. The ABC says that the government has been chasing the former owners of the work since the beginning of last year for unpaid royalties, and even made multiple threats to suspend their mining permits. Since the time that the works was placed into administration, the Prime Minister has announced a $2.4 billion assistance package to lend some help to those creditors during this time of transition. Now, the former owners, GFG Alliance, they claim that the company itself and its subsidiaries are actually the largest creditors of the works, and they are being owed $500 million. The remainder of that $1 billion sum is owed to the other creditors, which include a major one in Golding's Contractors, which is owed roughly $113 million. So there's some very large sums of money at stake here, and certainly some big questions to be put to the government and the new administrators at the meeting today. Gemma.
Rachel Merritt in Adelaide, thank you. The first images from Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost lunar lander have been released after its successful soft landing, as the race between commercial space enterprises picks up pace. Moments after the landing, the lander captured and transmitted images back home with spectacular views of Earth. Blue Ghost launched in January on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, taking a payload of 10 NASA instruments. It's the second privately owned spacecraft to land on the moon, but the first to do so without crashing or falling over.
Feel safe for landing. We're on the moon.
Okay. The second ever person to set foot on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, watched on as Blue Ghost touched down. In a video posted to X, he congratulated the Texas-based company on a successful landing. Firefly's successful soft landing is part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program, or CLPS, which enables private American companies to carry out missions taking crucial NASA payloads to the moon. Its goals are to reduce the agency's operational costs and accelerate NASA's Artemis program. Firefly's Blue Ghost landing was the third CLPS mission. The first was Atrobotic Technologies' Peregrine lander, which failed in space. The second was Intuitive Machines' IM-1 mission, which landed on the moon, but it tipped over on its side. And Intuitive Machines will get another chance with the IM-2 lander to touch down this Friday. Now, Jackson Liebeck is a flight director on the mission, and he joins us now. Jackson, I know this landing was cause for celebration. Can you tell us about that moment that the spacecraft was confirmed stable and upright?
It was really unreal. What a lot of people don't understand is the last 15 minutes is all automatic. And so we were just sitting there watching, verifying, and we don't get to see live footage of it, of course. We're just looking at the messages the spacecraft is sending down. We checked all of the telemetry and we saw that we had an extremely soft landing. It was actually softer than all of our simulations that we've done in the past.
And tell us about this mission, what it's part of, what it's building towards.
Yeah, this mission is building towards really just us going to the moon again. A lot of people don't realize that it's very difficult to go to the moon. Yes, we did it back in the 60s, but that was when you had humans on board and NASA really heading that. So now NASA are funding private companies to sort of compete, but work together as well to try and land on the moon successfully by themselves. And it's incredibly rewarding to be a part of a company that was the first to do it.
Yeah, so this landing was upright. It was within 100 metres of its target. Can you explain to us the difficulty of achieving this?
It's extremely difficult. I don't think people realise that we have no idea of, that 100 metres, what it looks like. If you go outside now, you'll see that the ground isn't very flat. And so we had a vision navigation team that designed a software that would automatically look for a safe place to land once we were about 100 meters from the ground. And then it picked a safe spot and we touched down softly. The photos that we have of the satellites orbiting the moon and taking photos, their resolution doesn't go to that depth. And so we really have no idea. We can predict that this is a relatively flat, safe place to land, but you could have a rock or a boulder, half the size of me that's sitting in the way and you just don't know it.
What did you think of those images sent back?
They're amazing. We're actually still getting images back right now, now that we've got our high-gain antenna working, and we're sending down videos, images, and I'm sure Firefly is going to be posting more to come. I've seen some just recently, actually, just popped off console, as you can see behind me there, as we were downlinking more videos and images of the landing last night.
Tell us more about what will be done up there and what the mission is part of.
Yeah, so we have 10 payloads or scientific instruments on board the spacecraft. So we're looking to be the first company to have a payload that's going to drill into the surface of the moon. We have various technologies measuring GPS data, looking at Earth. We have a technology that's trying to mitigate dust on the lunar surface, which is known to be quite annoying. And then we have a lot of imagery cameras on board that we're going to be taking images of and verifying in the next 14 days of Lunar Day.
And then what comes next?
Lunar night. We'll operate into lunar night. We're going to be taking a video of the sunset. And there's a phenomenon where the astronauts back in the 60s said that they thought the lunar dust levitated. So we're going to try and prove that that's a real thing. And then we're going to operate into the nighttime, but temperatures get pretty cold at night, so we don't expect to survive the lunar night.
Jackson Liebeck, Flight Director of the mission, joining us there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Researchers led by the CSIRO have shown for the first time how forever chemicals, known as PFAS, can be safely destroyed by burning them up. It could be a way to minimise the harm caused when these substances accumulate in the environment. Environmental chemist Dr. Wencha Liu led the research.
Through our research, we have already gathered lots of knowledge about those short-lived species. So this is for the first time ever. And there are like two take-home messages from our research. The first one is we need a high temperature. The temperature should be high enough to break a bigger PFAS molecule into smaller segments. Those segments, they have a very short lifetime, as short as like 1 millisecond. So this is the first one. But these short-lived species, they tend to recombine into harmful byproducts like greenhouse gases. So this is number one. And number two is a copious amount of water vapor is definitely needed in the system, because water vapor will prioritize capturing those short-lived species and neutralize them and convert them into some other inorganic compounds that can be further reused in some other industries, such as hydrogen fluoride. So there's a very valuable materials in chip manufacturing.
And it's time for the sport now with Catherine Murphy. Now, Catherine, it was a massive weekend for the NRL in Vegas. The Gillaroos had a huge win over England.
Yeah, a huge win indeed. Good morning to you, Gemma. There are no words to describe how big this win was, but I will give it my best shot. So they were absolutely smashed, England, in Las Vegas. And shout out to our English viewers. We know you haven't had a nice morning. We do love you, but we do have to deliver this result. So the Aussies ended up winners, 90 points to 4. It sounds like a cricket score, but it's rugby league. They outscored the Lionesses 17 tries to 1. Just incredible by them. And also the Gillaroos afterwards. So a massive one, because this is so historic for the Gillaroos playing internationally in the US. This was on free-to-air TV. So a massive occasion for them. Now, England did get that one consolation try, but it came with just seconds to go. So big celebration for the Gillaroos. But to add to England's woes, prop Vicky Whitfield had to be stretchered from the field after a head knock. She had to go to hospital, actually, Gemma. We really hope that she's doing okay. You just hate to see that. The more we learn about concussion, obviously, the more it is a concern. After the match, the captain of the Gillaroos, the co-captain rather, Ali Brigginshaw, had this to say.
You know, their Super League's kind of just starting, whereas NRLW is quite underway now, and we're expanding each year. So they need to hold their head high. They battled when they had the ball, and we just got on a roll there, and it was hard to stop. So, you know, we're humble with the win.
There you go, Ali Brigginshaw, so humble with the win, so classy. We're going to keep it humble and classy and just say congratulations to the Gillaroos.
Yeah. Now, Penrith and the Canberra Raiders also had a successful week.
Oh, they absolutely did, Gemma. It's always a risk taking your team to Vegas to start the season. There are plenty of distractions, that's for sure. But Penrith kicked off their premiership defence with a win over Cronulla in that Vegas season opener. So the Panthers actually had to fend off a late Sharks fight back in the second half. But in the end, they won 28-22. It was a brilliant match to start the season. Of course, they are bidding for an unbelievable 5th consecutive premiership. Elsewhere, the Canberra Raiders recovered from a tumultuous week, and we know what that involved, Gemma. We discussed that last week. They thrashed the Warriors in the end, 30 points to 8, and it was, of course, 22-year-old Xavier Savage. He scored a double, having proposed to his partner in the build-up to the match, and despite that terrible scoreline, you will have seen it just before in that footage, one Warriors fan even decided it would be a good time to pop the question, Gemma. Looks like he did get a yes, and I'll add some detail to that. It was the former New Zealander of the Year, Dr. Lance O'Sullivan, proposing to his partner, Dr. Rose Harris. I hope she did say yes there and then. I hope she kept to that when they got home. I assume she did. Don't have an update for you on that, Gemma. I apologise.
Well, we hope to get one, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you.
This year's Academy Awards ceremony is set to kick off shortly in Los Angeles, with comedian Conan O'Brien hosting for the first time. Now, Spanish language musical Emilia Perez heads into the Oscars with the most nominations, receiving 13 nods. Fellow musical Wicked, papal thriller Conclave and period drama The Brutalist are among the other top contenders. Australian Guy Pearce has been nominated in the Best Supporting Actor category for his role in The Brutalist. And it's time to check in on the weather with Nate Byrne. What's happening, Nate?
Gemma, I'm keeping a very close eye off the east coast for you right now. Tropical cyclone Alfred has re-intensified this morning to a Category 2 system, and it is causing some wild weather with some hazardous and damaging surf, coastal erosion, abnormally high tides expected for parts of the southeast Queensland coast. More broadly, we've got hazardous surf along the New South Wales north coast as well, and anywhere south of 1770 in Queensland. For the mainland, though, we're also keeping an eye on some troughs in the west, doing a couple of things. Number one, helping to cause plenty of heat. In fact, we've got some extreme fire danger on for the south of Western Australia today. High fire danger dotted across the nation. We are going to see a more storm activity, particularly over in the northwest of the country, but through WA too. A couple picking up in parts of New South Wales, but for the most part, Alfred's firing off offshore. We're just seeing some shower activity, just licking the east coastal fringe. Now, that is likely to change in the coming days with the system about to turn towards the Queensland coast. Maybe a coastal crossing Thursday or Friday. We'll have a better idea the closer we get. What we do know, though, is it's going to bring in a heck of a lot of rain. The locations may change a little, depending on exactly where it crosses the coast. But anywhere south of that coastal crossing is where we're likely to see big falls. Hundreds of millimetres, certainly. But the Bureau this morning saying we could see 600 millimetres a day for some as this comes in. Certainly a significant event. Also significant, particularly for the other side of the country, severe to extreme heat wave conditions continue. That's going to be a concern as well, but Alfred definitely got my focus. Let's get around the states quickly, and we'll start in Queensland, where you can see some of those showers just through the southeastern coast. Also some storm activity today just around the Gulf Coast and for the very top of the peninsula, but most of the state is fine. It's getting to 31 in Brisbane. We're getting some fresh to strong winds developing along the coast there, and for New South Wales as well. Showers through the east of the state, storms for the Hunter and the mid-north coast, maybe the northwest slopes as well. Sydney expect a couple of showers, getting to 26, Canberra fine and 28. After that, clear skies almost across the board, certainly in Victoria, other than the far east. 22 for Melbourne. Tassie, same, except for a couple of drops in the north and the northeast. Hobart's getting to 21. South Australia, no rain at all. 30 on the way for Adelaide. Over in the west, we'll see those storms through the interior and maybe just around the southwest coasts. Capes is the word I'm going for. Developing this evening, 28 in Perth, and then storms up top. Not for Darwin though, Gemma. It's getting to 34.
Thank you, Nate. And there's more on the ABC News app and on ABC iView. I'm Gemma Veness. We'll have our top stories for you in just a moment.